Like none of my family were part of gangs or anything like that. They were different, so when I chose this path to hang around these guys and get jumped into this gang, when I shared this with them, they couldn't understand like the decisions I was making because like the older guys that were part of the gang, they'd all been in prison, a lot of tattoos, but one thing they had is they had a lot of respect, and I wanted to do whatever I needed to do to earn that respect. My whole goal was, juvenile hall, wanted to go to YA, I wanted to go to prison, I wanted to do life. See, those were those were the goals that I wanted. It's like when you start hanging around or you start doing things to with people that are connected to the Mexican mafia, it's like you don't have a choice. And I remember he said, Martinez, aren't you tired? And I was like, tired of what? He's like, aren't you tired of the gangs, the drugs, going in and out? He goes, look at your rap sheet. And I'm like, no, not really. I go, this is my life. I go, I don't have another life. This is all I know. I go, Christians, those are for weak people. I told my boss, those are for weak people, people who drop out, people who are scared, of stuff they've done. And I go, I'm good. I remember driving with my mother, from the parole office and hearing the voice of God.
Pastor John Paul, thank you so much for talking to us today.
Thank you.
Can you take us back to your childhood? What were your upbringing like?
My upbringing was, when I think about it, I get a little bit torn up about it and stuff because I was the youngest. I was the youngest of 5 kids, and my upbringing wasn't the best. There was a lot of cheating, messing around with both of my parents. I felt all alone. I felt pretty much by myself because my brothers and sisters had each other, and basically I didn't have anybody because I was the youngest. And when I think back about my childhood, I remember one night my father chasing my mother around the house, and another night my mother chasing my father around the house. And I remember myself in the corner crying and my sisters pulling me into the room, telling me everything was going to be okay. This went on for a few years, as I had to be maybe about 7 or 8 years old at that time. And, I've always heard, things from my parents about separation and divorce. And I really didn't know what was going to happen, what was going to go on. But I knew that they wanted me to make a choice or a decision of who I wanted to stay with. And we ended up going to court. And I remember breaking down on the seat when they asked me. And there was so much hurt going on in my family at that time that, I didn't want to hurt my mother or my father when it came to a decision. So I kind of let them make the decision of where I was going to go. And finally, the decision was made, and I ended up going with my father.
What was your reaction when you heard that?
I really didn't know what to expect. I was so young, and the crazy thing about it was that I went through all these different emotions as a young kid. I felt lonely. I felt abandoned. I felt by myself. I felt like I had nobody to talk to. My family was broken. Everybody was all over the place. I was the youngest. My brothers and sisters were all older, so they had each other. And I just remember my father packing my stuff and taking me to, a city in Rialto, California. And, the emotions and just the things I went through, because my father was, a womanizer, after the divorce, and he was never home working, and I found myself pretty much all by myself once again.
What was your relationship with your mom after that?
Hit and miss with my mother. I started getting in trouble. I had to be about 10 or 11 years old. I started getting in trouble. And so when things like that happened for me, my father would ship me to my mom's, and then I would get in trouble at my mom's, and my mom would ship me back to my father's. And then they would ship me to my sisters, and then ship me to my brothers. So this was kind of like the thing for me growing up. And I was young at the time. I was 11, 12, maybe 13 years old at this time, and the relationship with my mother was just, we didn't talk much. We didn't talk much and stuff. I think my mother was trying to rebuild her life at that time. So I seen, different men come in and out of her life at that time. And I was trying to figure out who I was, because I had no identity at all of who I was.
Can you take us to your middle school to high school time? What were you like? Because you were lost and you didn't know your identity. So I assume I say that your friends would be your family?
Yeah, for middle school, it was pretty much, there was sports and different things, but, I was intrigued by the bald head, the baggy clothes. That kind of intrigued me, because these individuals, they held themselves different. They separated themselves from all the other kids that were in school. And it seemed like they had kind of like, I would say, like almost a brotherhood. They went everywhere with each other. They ate with each other. And, this was, I think, something that, I believe it was something that I was longing for, something that I didn't have. And it looked like they had each other. It looked like they were family. So this was something that kind of like pulled me in to those individuals like that were in middle school at that time.
So did you approach them?
Well, the thing is there was a couple of kids that were up the street. And on Friday nights, we were young, maybe 12, 13, maybe 14 years old. And on Friday nights, I wouldn't see them. And I always kind of wondered like where they went. And they would invite me to like parties on Friday nights, and growing up, my dad, when I got in trouble, man, he put the belt to me and hit me a couple of times. So, there was a little fear with my father, but as time went on, he wouldn't show up on Fridays or Saturdays and come back home on Sunday. So basically I was by myself. And so these guys that were up the street, I took their invitation one night, and the same kids that I seen at the middle school were the same kids that were at the parties as well. And, so, on Friday nights for me became like, oh, I'm going to go hang out because my father wasn't there. So I ended up approaching these guys on one Friday night. And, at first they were a little bit of, didn't look like they really wanted to accept me because they didn't really know me. They seen me and stuff. And then, as Friday nights went on, I started going to these parties and started hanging around them. I knew they were different. I didn't know it was really a gang. I just thought that they were pretty cool.
Until how long after you discover that they're not regular kids?
Probably one Friday night, there was like a really big fight that we all got into in the backyard. And I got involved in it too. And afterwards, it was like we all grouped up and got together, and went to another party, and it was pretty cool for me. It was pretty cool because I felt like, I was accepted. I felt like I belonged, and and I felt like I kind of found my new family.
Did you share your new family to your brothers and sisters at that time?
Oh, goodness. Yeah, the thing is like none of my family were part of gangs or anything like that. They were different. So when I chose this path to hang around these guys and get jumped into this gang, when I shared this with them, they couldn't understand like the decisions I was making because, they would say like, well, what's wrong or, what's the deal? Why are you choosing this? And for me, it was just like, well, they're family. I would tell them, you guys aren't here. You guys have moved on. You guys are older. But here I am. Pops isn't here. He's out there with different girls and stuff like that. And I feel like I belong. And unfortunately, from like that time forward, I had to be maybe about 13 years old when I got jumped into the gang. And my family kind of separated from me.
All of them?
All of them. They separated from me and they wanted really nothing to do with me because of the decisions that I was making.
And that really pushed you even further away from them?
Absolutely. I felt like, the gang was my newfound family. And I started like, hanging around them quite frequently. Like middle school for me, I wasn't really going anymore. We're taking off from school and, I started doing some things, started committing crimes, with these individuals as well, started going to juvenile hall. Those were the decisions that I started making because being part of the gang, that's kind of like what they do.
And to you, since that they are your family, you will do whatever they need of you or ask of you without any question.
Absolutely. That's kind of like what I was hoping for. Because like the older guys that were part of the gang, they'd all been in prison, a lot of tattoos. But one thing they had is they had a lot of respect, and I wanted to do whatever I needed to do to earn that respect. And I really didn't care who got in my way. I was going to get that respect. I wanted notoriety in that gang. So I started doing a lot of things for the gang in the neighborhood, and eventually all the rival gangs, basically knew who I was and what I was doing and started a lot of problems at home.
How old were you then?
Sheesh, I had to be about 14.
So young.
Yeah, 14, 15 years old maybe at that time.
Super young to even have thoughts of wanting notoriety and respect, because kids at that age, they just go to school, go home, play games. But you, at that age, you have to struggle and really fight hard to have a position in this gang family.
For me, it was about leveling up. Getting that notoriety where they would hear my nickname and they know what I was about. That was my whole thing. It was like some people have goals. That was my goal. My whole goal was, juvenile hall, wanted to go to YA. I wanted to go to prison. I wanted to do life. See, those were those were the goals that I wanted at a very young age, because being part of the gang, that's what they did. That was part of the life. You chose this, then, there's going to be some decisions, and I was willing to make those decisions for that gang.
That means you have achieved your goal if you go to prisons.
Yes.
If you're not going to prison, that means you're still trying to achieve that goal. That's the first time I heard.
Yes, absolutely.
So a lot of gang members, when they're in prison, that's part of their goals, why they're there?
Yeah, well, part of their goals is to become, connected, with, the prison gangs that are in there as well. That was something that I always wanted to be part of and wanted to do. Once I went to prison, and like as a young kid, it was just like, for me, it was like I'd be out from juvenile hall, go back to juvenile hall, go to a camp, get out of a camp, go to YA, from YA, go to another camp, come back out, then go to prison. There was, I remember one time, it got so bad in the neighborhood because all the things I was doing that the police were pulling over my homeboys, and they were saying, where's he at? Let him know that the rival gangs want to kill him. They're looking for him. Can you please let him know to be careful? Have his family be safe. And I remember coming home and the lights were off, walking into the house. I remember my father. My dad was a really big dude, about 6'4", like close to 300 pounds. And I remember my father laying on the floor, and he had a shotgun on his stomach. And I remember my dad at this time had remarried, and I remember I had a baby sister, and they were on the floor. I walk in, my dad's like, he's like, they're in the backyard. Somebody's here, they're in the backyard. And I remember I had a couple of my homeboys. I ended up going into the backyard. Nobody was there. I come back to the front. I turn on the porch lights, and there's spray painting all over my house. And on the garage door, it says my name, and it says 187. And so, which means that there's going to be a homicide. I just remember my dad crying. It hurts me a little bit.
How old were you then?
Maybe about 17, 18.
Still very young.
Yeah, at that time. Yeah.
Did you graduate from high school?
No. I think I went to maybe like 8th grade. I went to 8th grade, and then I just stopped really going. I was just really out of control.
So in that moment when you saw your father lying down with a shotgun, your baby sister, and you walked out and you saw 187, what went through your mind in that moment?
I was hot. I was mad. I remember my dad crying, and for a moment, like my emotion almost got me where I almost cried. But to cry is to show a form of weakness. So that's something we don't do in the gang. So I remember I thought to myself, well, whoever did this, I'm going to make sure that I find out, and I'm going to make sure that, I get them before they get me. That was my mentality.
And what happened after that?
I got busted. I went to jail. And it wasn't for murder or anything like that. It was for a couple years for a possession of a firearm, carrying a concealed weapon, loaded firearm with bullets in it and stuff. I ended up getting pulled over, and I went for a couple of years back to prison.
What happened to your dad and his family?
My dad moved. He never told me. I remember getting out of prison and going back to the house we lived in, knocking on the door, and a different family opened up the door. I probably didn't talk to my father for over like 15 years and stuff. I just remember knocking on that door, and a new family living there, and I had no idea where to go. I had nowhere to go. I was on the streets. I had nowhere to go.
You didn't contact your mom or your siblings?
No, nobody wanted me. My family didn't want me because of being part of the gang and the stuff I was, into and stuff. So, it was very challenging for me as a kid. I wanted so much, but I had nothing.
So you got out, found out your dad just disappeared, didn't know where he moved to. You were on the street for how long?
Probably about a month or so, and then I ended up going back to prison. For me at that time, it was like a revolving door. You know, and it was a safe place for me. Even though things happened in prison, it was a place where, you know, I got fed, you know, had friends, people I knew and stuff. So it became kind of like, you know, a permanent place for me to live. You know, especially with this going on the outs and stuff, I was just like, I'm good. You know, I always have prison to go back to. I'll be good and stuff like that. Yeah, but, you know, things started happening in prison and stuff like that.
Like what?
So there was a couple of guys that, you know, I ran into when I was in prison. And these guys seemed, you know, really strong, really cool, you know, and I was attracted to these guys, you know, and I didn't know that these guys were connected to the Mexican mafia. I just thought they were regular guys. And at that time on the yard, they had overflow, which meant like, you know, everybody was placed together. You had murderers, violators, you had everybody together because it was getting so packed at this time. And the guys that were there, you know, I just thought they were just guys on the yard, you know. And, you know, I remember playing, you know, cards with them and hanging out with them, eating with them. And then the next thing you know, I remember, you know, they received a kite. And what a kite is a kite's instruction from somebody that is in the Mexican mafia. And I remember sitting there. They opened it up. And I remember there were some instructions of what needed to be done on the yard. And the instructions had my name on it. And because somebody knew me that was in the hole in the back, you know, and like inwardly my heart like dropped, you know, about what was required, you know, to be part of that gang or be part or cleaning up the yard and stuff like that. And all I can say from that point forward, you know, things in prison kind of changed for me.
You even have to be tougher than before and colder.
Yeah, absolutely.
No feelings.
It's like when you start hanging around or you start doing things to with people that are connected to the Mexican mafia, it's like you don't have a choice. It's not like on the streets where you can like, you know, move away or go somewhere or something like that, or you can run. It's like, you know, you got to deal with it. You know, and one thing I told myself, you know, I won't die in prison. I said, I'll never die in prison. Whatever I got to do, I'll do to survive, but I'll never die in prison.
And so that's what you did. You stay alive and you survive in prison.
Yes.
When did you meet God? When did he come into your life, into your heart even?
Okay, so I think there might be like two parts to that. So I was released from a lockdown facility. They were trying to give me like 15 years to life, another charge. And at this time, Arnold Schwarzenegger, this is years ago, he came into to office now, and he passed something called the Miranda Act. So I remember I was in Chino prison. I was in Calusa, a slam down, high points, you know, violators and stuff. I remember I'm sitting there, and you know, when I got picked up by the police at that time, they had told me I was never going to get out. They said I was washed up and done, and you know, so my whole thing was just like, okay, well, I need to hit somebody and go to the bay, Pelican Bay, and do the rest of my time there.
That was what went through your mind?
That's what went through my mind. You know, to me, it's like when you do time, you don't have an out date. You know, others have out dates, but I didn't want an out date. I was just like, whatever needs to be done, I'm going to take care of it. And so I remember going to that place. I'm in there, and then 45 days, when 45 days, if you're in prison, I don't know if it's still like that now, it's been so long, but at that time, if parole didn't see you or they didn't, file on you, then they got to kick you out. So I'm sitting there on the 45th day, and I'm thinking to myself, and I remember a CO knocking on the door, and I'm like, hey, I go, what's going on? I go, hey, it's 45 days. This new act is out. I was trying to be like this counselor and stuff in there, and she's like, Martinez, I don't know what's going on. And I go, can you find out? She's like, we'll let you know. We'll let you know. So the day goes on, and I receive a kite from the Mexican mafia. And on the kite, it opens up saying that I had to stab somebody the following day. So I grab it, and I'm okay with it. I'm like, cool, I got to do what I got to do. And so that night, there was a knock on my cell. There's a knock on my cell. The door opens, and it's the CO. She said, Martinez, get your stuff. You're going home. And here I am with the kite, saying I had to kill somebody the following day. And then she's telling me I'm going home. I felt like this weight was lifted from me at that moment. I didn't know that God was calling me. I just thought it was a mistake. So I remember grabbing all my stuff, or what I had, and I remember going with her. I remember going down to the Sally ports, and I'm thinking to myself, what's going on? They're telling me that I'm never going to get out. This is going to happen. They don't even file on me, nothing. And I'm going to a bus stop. Came here to the city of Whittier. So my mom was at. I burned my bridges. I had done so much stuff out there. Nobody wanted me around. And, I'm out there politicking and stuff, causing problems, with things that happen in prison, out there on the streets. And I remember speaking to my mom, and I had nowhere to go. I remember knocking on a couple of our so-called cousins' houses. My mom would be like, can we stay here for the night? No, I can't have you here. They'd see me, no, he can't be here. I can't have you here either. So I was telling my mom, I said, well, let's just sleep in a park or something like that. I go, tomorrow I'll just go back, go back to Rialto. I go, I'm okay with it, Mom, it's fine. And she said, do me a favor. She's like, before you go back, come with me to the parole office. At least check in so you at least have a month before they put, a hold on your parole. And I'm like, okay, that's fine. So I ended up going to the parole office, and I remember it wasn't my parole officer, it was an officer of the day. And I remember he said, Martinez, aren't you tired? And I was like, tired of what? He's like, aren't you tired of the gangs, the drugs, going in and out? He goes, look at your rap sheet. And I'm like, no, not really. I go, this is my life. I go, I don't have another life. This is all I know. I grew up in this, and this is what I chose. And he goes, listen, if you're tired, he's like, you might not tell me you're tired, but if you're tired, I'm going to give you a phone number. It's to a men's home. And I was like, okay. He goes, yeah, it's a phone number to a men's home. And if you're really tired, sick and tired of being tired, you can call this home. And I thought to myself, I go, Christians, those are for weak people. I told my parole officer, those are for weak people, people who drop out, people who are scared, of stuff they've done. And I go, I'm good. And I remember putting the phone number in my pocket. And I remember driving with my mother, from the parole office and hearing the voice of God. None of my family was, none of my family was serving God or Christian. They're Catholic, but rarely ever went to Mass. And I remember the Lord speaking to me so powerful, just a couple of words. He said, for the wages of sin is death. Yeah, I had no relationship with God, and like this fear or something came over me because of my position of where I was at. And I started weeping uncontrollably, and it took me back to 1997 when I was released from a lockdown facility. I went to a party and, there's a couple of people there, and I heard some noises in the bushes. And I thought to myself, John Paul, just relax. It's just noises in the bushes. It's not nothing. But there's a couple of times I heard those noises, and the phone kept on ringing uncontrollably. It'd ring, the person would hang up, it'd ring again. And I remember later on that night, about 1:30 in the morning, getting into the car, and all of a sudden this man jumps out of the bushes, and he has a gun to my head. Within a quick second, I remember turning my head, and he shot. One of the bullets went and lodged in my back of my skull, and the other went into the cab of the car. I remember being rushed to the hospital, but in that moment, I remember going to a stop sign in the car, and then things started happening to me. Some crazy things. I saw like these pictures came up of my life. It's hard to explain, but in every picture was a memory of something I did with my family. In every memory, I was able to experience like the laughter, all the things I went through. I experienced everything from my life up to the present point quickly. And I thought to myself, I'm dying. I couldn't move my legs. I thought I was paralyzed. I was bleeding all over the place. The people that were in the car with me, two girls that were screaming uncontrollably and stuff. And I remember even at that moment, I asked the Lord for forgiveness. I said, and I thought to myself, I haven't been a father to my kids. I'm out here running around, using, in and out of prison. All these things came to me. And then I ended up at the hospital. I remember them taking me back to this room, and I remember the lights. I remember I had tubes in my nose and in my mouth. And I remember there was a police officer from Rialto holding my hand. And he said, whatever you do, he said, don't fall asleep. Don't go to sleep. Hang on. Hang on. And I remember I was real cold, so they covered me. And he said, yeah, don't go to sleep. And I started getting really tired. Next thing you know, I was out. I was in this place, the scripture talks about it. It's called the outer darkness. I was in this place and it was dark. It seemed like there were stages of darkness, and there was something behind me. I don't know what it was, but it was pushing me. And I was trying to fight against it, and it kept on pushing me deeper into the darkness. And as I got into the darkness, this fear, like I had fought some pretty big guys in my life, and I've had some fear, but this fear was unexplainable. It was kind of like a quenching fear that I had. And I kept on going down, and it seemed like it was a corridor or something. And I could hear people. At first, I thought there was people rejoicing and laughing in the deeper darkness. But as I got closer to these people, there were actually people screaming for help. And then all of a sudden, I woke up. And I remember I started shaking uncontrollably on the table, so they had to hold me down, and I could hear my heartbeat. And I remember that. But I didn't tell nobody about that because, to be honest with you, I didn't get saved till years later. And this brings me to 2005, when I was in this home now, this men's home that I'm going to, and giving my life to the Lord. I remember like crying out to God. Just tired. I felt like I was going to die. couldn't do it no more. And I remembered what the Lord had showed me years prior. And I felt like if my life didn't change, eventually that's where my life would remain, in a place like that. I remember crying out to God in the altar at that men's home right here in the city of Whittier and saying, God, you know, if you're for real, you'll take all the drugs, all the different things, you'll deliver me from those things. You know, God didn't do the 12-step with me. He did the 1-step with me. And he delivered me at that moment.
So good. When you fully seek him and cry out to him, that's when he's going to answer your prayer.
Yes, amen.
Go back to your mother. What was your relationship with your mom at that time? Because you mentioned that you went with your mom. So she was living by herself, or what happened to her years later?
So she was pretty much living by herself. You know, growing up in a very abusive family, there was a lot of stuff, like physical abuse I'm talking about, that happened. And basically she was kind of like by herself after the divorce. Nobody wanted to talk to her, brothers or sisters. So she was kind of by herself. And, you know, I was kind of like, everybody called me the black sheep and stuff. So like when I'd be in the county jails or in prison, I'd either get letters from her or she would come visit me. And, you know, so for me and her, like, I could say our relationship kind of grew through that. I could talk to her about things and she wasn't judgmental about those things, but I told her there was a big struggle going on with me. So that's kind of like how my relationship was with my mom. I had nowhere to go and she basically, we'll find somewhere for you. So that's how I ended up with my mom.
So when on the way, you and your mom, on the way to men's home, and that's when the Lord spoke to you, the wages of sin is death.
Yes.
And he brought that 1997, he reminded you what happened.
Yes.
And you knew that you were in hell. You already dead.
Yeah.
Died.
Yeah.
And you were in hell. So he brought that back to you to remind you, if you continue to go back to your old self, that's where you're going to end up. You knew it instantly.
Yes. Yes, I knew instantly. You know, I was in a home, so for me, it was different because it's like there was a lot of structure in the home. You know, I didn't know nothing about Christ. I knew I'd accepted him, but it wasn't until 3 months later I really had both feet in because I didn't know if it was for real. I had a lot of homeboys who would serve God, and then I'd see them back at the connection weeks later. So growing up for me and seeing that, you know, I knew God moved in the neighborhood sometimes and delivered my home. And some of my homeboys were completely delivered, never came back, you know. So that was my outlook on serving the Lord, you know, and it wasn't until I completely surrendered. Even though I made a confession, it was 3 months later where I completely surrendered my life to God. And that's when he started moving in my life in this home.
What made you to fully surrender to Christ 3 months after?
There was a brother I was really like my best friend in the home. And he told me one day, he's like, you know what, you need to make up your mind. You know, either you're going to serve God or you're not. Either you're going to stay here or you're going to leave. What is it going to be? And I remember I received that from him because, you know, I could receive something like that from him because we were so close. We did everything together in the home. And that's the day when I completely surrendered my life to God.
Since that day, can you talk about your journey with Christ since that day until now?
My journey has been incredible. I remember when I was in the home, we're going through a time of fasting and praying, you know, and I know that a lot of people do this and say this, but, you know, what's my purpose? I wanted to know what my purpose was, what my destiny was, what my calling was. And I remember like just seeking the Lord on prayer for like maybe 4 hours on my face. And I remember the Lord spoke to me and he took me to the book of Isaiah, I believe it's 61, where he said, the Spirit of the Lord is upon me and has anointed me to preach the gospel to the poor. And I remember, like, he took me there and I'm like, you're calling me to preach? I go, are you sure? You know, and at that moment, I felt so unqualified. I felt like I wasn't studied, you know, in and out of prison, you know, ex-drug addict, ex-gang member, you know, had prison affiliation with the Mexican mafia, had all these different things going on in my life. And then all of a sudden, you know, God calls me to preach the gospel, you know, and I kept that to myself. I didn't say nothing. And I believe a couple of weeks later, you know, when I was in the home, at that time, the pastor was Pastor Danny Alvarez of the home, of the ministry that was there. He sat me down. He said, you know what? He goes, can I talk to you? I said, sure. He goes, I really believe that you got a call to be a pastor. And I remember I just was like, and I knew it was the Lord speaking to me, confirming what he had spoken to me, you know, prior to that. And he goes, yeah, I believe that God has called you. He said, you know, there's a couple of things you need to do. He said, you need to protect yourself. Protect yourself from things, you know, you got to keep yourself and make sure you make some good decisions and stuff. He said, that'll be later on, you know, but God's going to take you through a process.
So since that day, you completely just follow Christ?
Yeah, I followed Christ. I went to ministry school for about, they had to throw me out. I was there for about 4 years. I loved it. For me, I went to ministry school because I just wanted to grow in my relationship. You know, I wanted to study. I wanted to get into the Word. I wanted to know more about Jesus, you know, my identity, different things like that. And ministry school really teach me and told me about those things. And I remember, a few people talking about the calling of God that was on my life. And they said, we're going to send you out to downtown LA to the rescue mission. And they said, we want you to preach the gospel. And I was just like, okay. You know, and I think I was the youngest there. We had people that were part of that ministry, had been in ministry for 40 years, 50 years, 30 years. Here I am, 2 years in, 3 years in, or something like that, 4 years in, something like that, and I remember them sending me to the rescue mission. And I remember my first time preaching. I remember they spat on me, they threw food at me, clothes at me, shoes at me, everything you can think of, they threw at me, and I knew that was part of the training, part of the process that I had to go through. And I didn't want to do it. I wanted to run, being young in the things of God, I was just like, I want to make sure that this is the right message. I want to make sure, this is you, God, speaking. So there was always this wavering with me being a young Christian. But I'm thankful that I stood my ground and did what I believe God wanted me to do. And in 3 years, I brought over 4,000 people to the Lord within that ministry.
Praise God. And now how long have you been walking with the Lord right now?
I've been walking with the Lord this March is 19 years serving the Lord.
He took you out of darkness and brought you into his marvelous light.
Yes.
Have he brought you back to the environment where you grew up and shared the gospel to your homies?
Yeah. Throughout the years, I've had different people from the neighborhood reach out to me, and I had some people separate from me because of what I chose, but I knew it was only for a season. And I've shared with numerous people, sometimes it's not behind the pulpit, sometimes it's by the phone or text messages, but I've done so much ministry, You know, and social media now, I could send them all this stuff and they see it. They might not say it, but they see it. And I'm starting to see how God is starting to break that spirit of gang affiliation in the city of Rialto, where I grew up at. And I'm starting to see my homeboys one by one coming to Jesus.
Hallelujah. Hallelujah. That did you know in your heart that you were in hell in 1997 and that it was God's grace and mercy brought you back?
Yes. Yes, I knew I had an experience. Even though I was in my muck and my mire, I knew something had happened to me. You know, and I remember thinking to myself, you know, when I came back home, sitting in my room, I was like, man, something just happened. Something happened to me. But I knew I couldn't share that with anybody because everybody would probably thought I was crazy, you know? But I knew it was God showing me that if I continued, eventually that's where my life was going to end up at. And when I woke up, you know, years later, I think about what I experienced. I'm so thankful. Yeah. So thankful for God calling me.
That's why the Bible said his mercy endures forever.
Yes.
His loving kindness endures forever.
Yes.
And his mercy are new every morning. The name that you received, the kite, for the assignment the next day. So what happened to that particular name? Because the Lord took you out the night before, out of prison. Did they ever, the Mexican gangs, did they ever try to
I believe
reach you or contact you because of that assignment?
To be honest with you, I really don't know what happened. You know, the Bible says that he'll make even your enemies to be at peace with you. And that's been my prayer for 19 years.
Praise God.
And God has protected me from that. And I'm able to be on platforms just like this and tell others about how Jesus pulled me out.
Not only Jesus pulled you out, but he restored
Yes.
what the enemy has stolen.
Yes.
And not only he restored what the enemy has stolen, he also revealed to you, let you taste his goodness, that nobody is better than him.
Yes.
Nothing will satisfy the hunger and the thirst in your soul except
Yes.
Jesus.
Right.
You've been there, you were searching for love. You didn't have validation and love from your parents nor your brothers and sisters. So you were seeking, and he knows that. He said, blessed are the broken in spirit,
Yes.
the poor in spirit,
Yes.
for they shall inherit the kingdom of heaven.
Yes.
So many of your homies, I'm pretty sure they also went through what you went through. They
Yes.
didn't have the love from the family. And so that's why they formed their own family. And that's why that was attracted to you, to
Yes.
join that. He knew that. Now, for the last 19 years, have you shared his everlasting love to those homies, to let them know how good Jesus is?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I've shared with them on platforms. I've shared with many on platforms as well. And they know that, you know, I will do whatever I can as long as they want that change to help them.
Isn't it beautiful to see the hand of God is moving in all nations, not just
Yes.
the Latino, but all over the world?
Yes. Yes.
And that he's bringing his children back to him.
Yes.
He's drawing everyone back to him.
Yes.
What is the one message you want to share with those that are watching your testimony today, brother?
I think the biggest message is that change is possible through Christ. You know, I tried sometimes to change, but those ways never worked. It wasn't until I did this thing with Jesus and that worked. That worked. So change is possible. Yeah, it's possible.
Has your relationship with your dad restored and with your siblings restored? Were you able to share the gospel to your family?
Yes. My dad went home to be with the Lord about 1.5 years ago. I brought my father to the Lord. I brought my mother to the Lord. I brought basically my whole family to the Lord. I got to do my father's celebration of life, and my family accepted Christ. So I brought in all my family. You got to start in your own backyard. You got to start with your family first. Yeah, and God has restored my family, all my family to me.